Ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you that we don't want the children becoming elite in the future. We do not support a world where the kids are schooled into elitism. So what we want to explain how the private school look like. The private school will compose a bunch of rich families, and their children, of course, is really rich. And of course, you can see that in the private school, is a rich and influenced families and living. And you can see that if they have problems, the rich people have money to fix it. But in a public school, actually everyone can go into this school, and everyone can go to, and everyone, but they have no money, because you can see that the rich people go to the private school, but the poor people will of course go to the public school, and you can see that the two groups of people, rich and poor, isolate each other from the beginning to the end. Sorry. And I want to say that we want to ban the private school. And private school, we just want to ban is the school level. From the elementary to the high school levels, not university. And we know that our policy will just like, we will need 2 to 5 years to let the kids in the private school to graduate from the private school, and they learn to have this kind of graduate systems. And after that, we will phase out the private school systems, and maybe we will need to take more time to let this private school become public school. And also we know that and we know that because we want to take these measures need a lot of money. So the first one is that we will do it within the budget, and we will allocate the funds and to redistribute the funds to the school systems. And second one is that we will introduce the task if it is necessary, and we will give more funds to the private to a school system to make the school better.
Yeah, first point.
Okay.
Currently, there are government scholarships being given to poor people to go to private schools. Why is that not enough?
Okay, and we want to say that because in nowadays society we have so many problems. That first one is that public school, we can see that just only the poor people can go in, and not the poor people can go in. Just because they cannot afford so expensive tuition fees, so they cannot go to a private school. But you can see that public school is always the rich people, the rich and influential people. And you can see since they are very little, they cannot engage. Two groups of people cannot engage each other. You can see that the rich people in the private schools always say the full education, full maybe the equipment, teaching equipment, and good teaching methods, and also they are from the elite family. So since the children, since they was little, they just shaping this kind of priority, and they just think that they are privileged people, and they do not have this kind of sympathy to help others. So how we want to have more people to become, more school to become a public school, because everyone can go in, no one can isolate from each other. And so the children, the kids, since they was little, they cannot shaping this kind of priority. And no one will feel that our family is better or elite than any family in the society. So kids will easily to know how the poor people think, because in their classmates, maybe they are from a poor family, and they know what the situation goes like in the public, because they are engaged each other. So we do not support a world where kids are schooled into elitism, and maybe we know that our policies want to use time and use money to face the problem, face out the schooling, the private schooling system, and to make. And so our first argument is that we do not let the gap between rich and poor become really widened. And second of all is that we do not let kids become elite since they was little. And we need to solve these problems, and so we will support this motion.
All right, thanks for Prime Minister for her speech. Let's welcome Leader of Opposition. Here.
Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, rebuttal to the government side. They say that all kids from rich family, if they go to private school, they will become elite. And my partner just mentioned about the government can give scholarship to poor people, and then they can go to private school. And also, just mentioned that there are also rich people who study in public school, like NTU. Many people in NTU is rich, and so they say that poor people cannot go private school. But we say, but opposition side think that if you really cannot afford the tuition of public school of private school, that also means if you're really from a poor family, that means you cannot even make it to the university. You might have to work or you might have to go to work immediately after you graduate from senior high school. And then we want to mention about it's all about your choice. It's your choice to go to private school to get maybe better resources. Many students who study in private school, like Ruitang, will borrow student loan and pay back after they start working. So even if you don't feel like you're from a poor family, even if you don't feel like you're poor in a university or you're in public school, you will still feel it in the society. So we say that the policy that the government gives us is actually a bit not helpful. So first is our tip stance. We're not going to ban private school, but we're going to give better regulation on it. And first argument is that I'm going to talk about how important education is. Education affects our life in the future. Education is we made many decisions to get in different schools to choose what we want. And so, for example, if you're some people who believe in some people who are Catholic or Christian, they might follow their parents or follow their wish to go to private Catholic or Christian private schools, and it's kind of what government side is doing, kind of take away their chances to do so. Also, many private schools give better resources, give better resources than the public school, and that is what the government side mentioned about. It will give more funds to, yes?
On our side of the house, we can do public religious school as well. But why do rich people deserve the choice to go to those private schools in the first place as opposed to poor people who can go to those schools as well?
But if poor people want to go to private school, it's their choice to do so. We didn't ban those students to go to private schools. So if they cannot afford it, maybe they can do like the student that I just mentioned about. Yes?
Can a poor black person in America afford a $10,000 per semester private school?
Yes, and so about the money issue, my partner will later on explain for me.
Here.
The most important part of education is that you get to education impacts your life in the future. So second, I'm going to talk about the freedom of choice, because in some country that government is a bit controlling, they control their public schools and they do brainwashing. So like the president of NTU just got changed because of government issue. So we can say that this example is not the only example in the world. And also about the brainwashing part, they don't publish. The reason why religious school, private school exists is that first, public school are not allowed to talk about religions. They don't teach
religion. They try to avoid it, and then later on my partner will explain more example for me. So what the conclusion is that we should be able to know what we want and make the choice.
Prime Minister, take care.
The public schooling system as a concept is not inherently flawed. It is the harmful class-based segregation mechanism in society that makes this system problematic. Today we support the disintegration of this insidious class-based system that segregates students and schools by class, which is why we're proud to support the motion this House will ban private schools. Because, ladies and gentlemen, today we do not support a system where students are schooled into elitism. So let me begin with some rebuttal and look at the case that they brought about. Guys, I haven't debated in 3.5 years. It's early in the morning, my day doesn't begin until 12, so I'm not going to break down the math for you. But I will tell you that their scholarship alternative of letting more students get funded to go into private schools is just not feasible. Unless they're here supporting a model where every single millionaire and billionaire in the world adopts a whole class for as long as their wealth exists, and perhaps not even then can we ever actually bridge the gaps in capacity, the gaps in teaching, the gaps in efficiency, and the gaps in teacher-student ratios, no thank you sir, that exist between public and private schools today. And we tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that the only way to make this change, to give these students in public schooling systems that are stagnating in the inefficiencies of their governments, the only way to give them a sliver of a chance is to institutionalize organic change. And we tell you that organic change happens when rich parents have to deal with the fact that their rich, bratty children have to face the same problems that poorer children who have less privilege in society face on an everyday basis in government schools across the world. We tell you, ladies and gentlemen, no thank you sir, that when they tell you that there's going to be better regulation, they're talking about a nebulous concept of better regulation. How can we regulate a private school? A private school has its own board of trustees, has its own departments, and governments are not supposed to interfere in private schools. If they want to preserve this kind of like public-private division and still have integrity in their system, they're not going to be able to actually regulate private schools. We tell you that our phased-out mechanism, even if it takes time, will force every single student to actually go to a public school. What this means is that when these schools no longer have working toilets that allow menstruating girls at the age of puberty to go to school on a regular basis in rural India, we tell you that it's only when the rich students in that area and the poor students in that area have the same access to something as basic as toilets that we will have these public schools like plumbing systems and sanitation systems fixed. We tell you that when there are talented sportsmen in urban centers and towns that don't have access to the rich schools and the rich kind of infrastructure, we tell you that all of these stadiums and all of these like gym infrastructure will be improved when there are rich parents sending the rich children to these schools who then say, wait, why is it that our swimming pool hasn't been working in 6 months? We tell you that this kind of lethargy that currently exists in the public schooling system can be improved by one very, very important thing, and that thing is political capital. And we tell you that racial minorities, religious minorities, class and caste and like gender minorities who only have access to public schooling systems right now do not have that political capital. And we tell you we need to break down this elitist bastion that is a private school in order to have these students integrate. Yes, you had a point of information. Closing.
If you're really against the culture of elitism, why is the ban only for primary and secondary school? Why not extend it to universities?
First off, it's all the way until high school. But second, here's why we tell you it's not in the case of university. Because higher education, particularly tertiary education, is so colossally expensive, we think it's an unfair burden, particularly placed on developing countries as governments. We don't think that is funding that these governments can afford to do. And we therefore believe that private players should have a role in tertiary education systems in order to have super specialized research and R&D departments continue to be funded in prestigious universities. However, we tell you that what stops these poor students and like minority students and disenfranchised students from accessing these education systems is the crappy public school infrastructure that they're forced to go to from the beginning. It is because when private schools have a 1:8 ratio and these students have 1:60 ratio in terms of teachers, they're not going to be able to get individualized attention. We're not saying we'll break that 1:60 ratio down to 1:8 for every single student. But when we break it down to 1:20 or 1:30, these students have a sliver of getting individualized attention that right now they cannot do because rich people and all of their money goes directly towards private systems. We tell you, ladies and gentlemen, education is important and choices are important. Let's complicate both those concepts, right? We'll tell you what happens after school. We tell you that when these students don't have access to the same good primary and secondary education system that private schools have, they go into colleges that are less well known. These students get caught into the cycle of poverty because they don't get into good universities with good degrees that then get them good jobs, and their own children end up going to the same crappy public schools that they originally went to. And we tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that it's not actually a choice. It is not a choice if you are low caste in India. It is not a choice if you are poor in China. It is not a choice if you are black in America to go to private schooling systems. And that is why we will not support a system that allows students to be schooled into elitism.
Alright, thanks for the Deputy Prime Minister. Let's welcome Deputy Leader of Opposition to closing the opening half. Here.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, do not buy the entire rhetoric coming from the entire opening government. Because if you're going to look at the problem and the solution, I don't think it's really explored. Firstly, I asked the question, why not extend it to universities in general? She said that, well, it's colossally expensive. But we say that this kind of inconsistency only reflects the fact the problem isn't really such a massive problem that they actually want to paint it to be. Because if it's that important, then I do think that the state should be willing to engage in that particular venture to begin with. But the second thing that actually asked a while ago is that how does banning private schools really address the problem? The only thing which the previous speaker said is that, well, rich people will actually pour in money. So I mean, like, how much is that particular money anyway? And can they actually uplift the entire public school system when the alternative is it's the government's money actually, which is more abundant than the rich parents' money they sell, which are already currently paying for all these private school systems. But the second reason why she said that there is actually, the policy solution is that there's no political will in the status quo. We say that's untrue. Because the people who do go to public schools are actually the masses. And the masses do hold a big voting bloc to begin with. So they do have that particular political will to begin with. But let's address the second thing that they mentioned, the idea of economic divide. Firstly, they said that banning is only for private schools. So the problem still exists. But more importantly, we just have to improve the quality of education, right? So when governments spend more in the public education, therefore the infrastructures are higher paid for school, then we do think that there will be an improved public school education, something which they never really addressed in the debate. And I was talking about government scholarships, for example, for poor kids to be able to go to private schools. If you want more people to actually go to private schools, then spend on more people, ladies and gentlemen, more poor people. And then on the black people argument coming from their side, because we love Beyonce. She said that they don't have access to these private schools. Firstly, what about affirmative action, where you can have more black minorities who can enter your particular schools? If you want more of them, then increase the quota of the people who are entering. But secondly, your solution doesn't address the problem because the ban is only up until secondary education. So more opportunities are created in universities and not necessarily in primary and secondary school, ladies and gentlemen. The last thing coming from a POI, ladies and gentlemen, from Sam, whom I remember right now, is the idea that, well, you can also have religious education. The thing is, it's not true. Because in civil liberal democracy, the separation between church and state is very important. The reason why you do have that is because the state has a tendency to abuse religious institutions and to actually use it for their own political propaganda to brainwash the followers of these particular institutions. So that can never happen in our side. So let's talk about two important things. First is the freedom of choice, and the second one is more freedom of choice. So the first is about the idea that a liberal democracy is high threshold. There has to be a clear and present danger before you can ban anything. Because these civil actually like censors, it only means that your freedom of the press is actually being censored, ladies and gentlemen, it's being trampled upon because the state wants to expand its power, ladies and gentlemen, towards you. In the Philippines, for example, we do have faces of President Duterte, who I know a lot of people here do not like, ladies and gentlemen, saying that he's the most definitive authority, even, like more supreme than God itself, ladies and gentlemen. And we do see that it's one way of brainwashing the public, creating a cult following, ladies and gentlemen, to pave way for his authoritarianism, ladies and gentlemen. And the people who are actually vocal against him are private institutions, specifically Catholic institutions, ladies and gentlemen, who are holding him accountable. So what happens now is that if you allow him to ban, ladies and gentlemen, in primary and secondary school to brainwash people, making him think like he's a god, ladies and gentlemen, he can easily creep into that and extend it to private universities, ladies and gentlemen, as a form of punishment for those people who are criticizing. We don't want this. This is greater tyranny, ladies and gentlemen, which is simply cloaked as a form of addressing elitism. And we think that it's a greater harm compared to the solution of Taiwan itself. Secondly, the issue of freedom of choice and the right to make momentous decisions. It's very important, ladies and gentlemen. Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, are allowed to refuse blood transfusion because of their right to religion. You have Muslims allowed to refuse medically necessary big donations of actually their particular organs, largely because the state recognizes that your rights to believe in something is more important. And in this particular thing, choosing which school to go to, choosing the school that your parents went to, ladies and gentlemen, especially if it's a Catholic school or a private school, is something that you have the actually right to decide. And your parents should have the right to decide for you. Because your parents probably want you to be brought up like a Catholic, just like everybody else, so that you wouldn't stick out like a sore thumb, ladies and gentlemen. These are kind of intimate decisions that you and your family should actually be able to make, because it's an expression of who you are, and because it's an extension of your very autonomy. All of these rights do exist, only to enable your rights to be happy. If going to a public school, for a private school, which is an art school, ladies and gentlemen, it will make you happy. We think that the state has no right whatsoever to intervene in that particular decision. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks for
It is not enough for the affirmative team to just portray that there is a harm. They need to demonstrate that the harm is systemic, that the harm is inherent within the system, that any forms of regulations or any forms of attempt of reform is simply impossible. Therefore, banning becomes the ultimate solution. None of that burden of proof was met by the affirmative team. That's why they cannot win this debate. I'm going to talk about two arguments in my speech. First, I'm going to talk about the harms of their policy, how this puts a massive burden on states' resources, how that necessarily leads into worse quality of education overall for everyone in that entire country. Secondly, I'm going to talk about how this deprives individuals with specific needs their ability to self-actualize and develop themselves. But before that, one major point of rebuttal to the entire case of the affirmative. So basically, OJ and CG had like similar argumentation, just different packaging, if you guys notice. So basically, they talked about elitism, that the poor and rich, you don't really interact, and that's a bad thing. 4 responses to that. Number 1, so opening opposition told you that there's scholarship and financial aid. What we're going to explain to you is that why currently this is the trend that private schools are going through. Number 1, most of these private schools are companies and corporations that have incentive to do CSR or corporate social responsibility to improve their image and reputation. But also these schools actively want to improve their diversity, because if your school is completely white, that there's no black person, there's no Asian person, you would look a bit racist, right? So therefore, there are incentives to make sure that you expand your student base to make sure that it's inclusive as possible. Second response is that these schools oftentimes have collaborative programs, like for example, week-long programs of going to rural areas, living with the locals and understanding about their cultures and how they live. We think this is a way to create empathy. Fourthly, is that their argument about, on CG specifically, on the public religious school, is actually contradictory. Because if they wanted inclusivity, you're actively propagating exclusion at their side of the house, because only people of the same religion would be able to go to these public religious schools. That's number 1. But second of all, the only religious schools that would be actively advocated for are the ones that come from the majority religion. So if you come from the minority religion, you're unlikely to have funding from the state because your population isn't really that much. So their side of the house is also creating exclusion on their side. But fourth response to this is that we think that this is principally unjustified, because we recognize that the public system is super flawed, but you're using these rich children as a battering ram. You're punishing them, their access and ability to get education, but they're not the source of the problem. The source of the problem is the corrupt politicians, is basically the messed up political system that exists. So what you need to do is direct the attention towards that issue rather than punishing these children because you think that's the fair punishment to do. First argumentation, why this is a massive burden on the government. So right now, in status quo, the rich pay for their own tuition fee out of their own pockets, so the poor can go to public school for free. We think that this is the ideal condition because the principle of subsidy is that redistribution should be made based on economic status and needs. Their policy is going to drastically alter the way that government budget is allocated, because you must fund everyone, because everyone from private schools must be integrated towards the public schools, and therefore you also need to increase the number of wage, because like what they said, the teachers are also going to be paid under the government themselves. So what this means is that this would put a strain on the state's resources, and please bear in mind that governments do not have that much resources. They have very limited amount of capital that they can allocate. So there's 2 possible outcomes. Number 1, the division of the money would be spread very thin, because if you really want to create equality towards all, most of the schools are going to get very little lump sum money that is not enough for them to sustain the education. Or second, public schools will have to start charging money for people to be able to attend these schools. The harms of those 2 scenarios are as follows. Number 1, if the division of the money is going to be thin, what happens is that it's the rich people that is going to lobby the government for more allocation on their schools. This is what happens in the United States when you see a discrepancy between schools in New York City and schools in Brooklyn, where you have, they're basically in the same state, but there's a massive disparity. This obviously harms the quality of education that children would enjoy, and that's a bad thing. But the second argument I'd like to talk about is that there are children with very special needs. For example, children with religious needs, children with cultural needs. For example, in Malaysia, you have vernacular schools of Indian schools, Malay schools, and Chinese schools. You also have children with special needs, like for example, physical disabilities. They might be blind, they need learning facilities such as Braille and other teaching assistants. The best way for you to cater them is to make sure that you have enough capital, but because that these people are minorities, they would be very low on the government's priority list. So what would happen is when you integrate them in public schools, they would unlikely be catered for. People with all of these specific needs are going to be sacrificed. We think that if you really wanted to create reform, it shouldn't be at the cost of children. Please oppose the motion.
Whip to closing the proposition side. Here.
Ladies and gentlemen, when the resources constraint is not a justifiable reason for you to simply put all these constraints and limited resources onto the privileged one in the society. We don't see this justification makes sense on the opposition side. When the resources is constrained, there are so many ways to deal with it. Under our side, if those collaboration have the morality to donate money to private school, have the incentives to actually promote their image and actually help with the education, we don't see why this is mutually exclusive from our side, because if we really have that intention, they can still fund the public school, donate to public school, and increase the quality of public school. And therefore, we are making the education not an exclusive resources toward those in private school, but the resources to all schools. We don't see how that argument is mutually exclusive from our side. First of all, let's deal with the harms that first of all, the government side have already portrayed the harms to you that the inequality is already serious in the society, that poor people do not have those access actually to private school, to those privileged resources that those rich people receive in the society. We tell you that it is problematic and there's no incentives for the politicians to choose that because their children are in private school and they are not on the priority list of those politicians as well. We tell you that it's problematic in the status quo, that by simply giving them scholarship and by giving them financial aid is not enough as long as that kind of structural inequality still exists in the society. We have told you how we're going to solve this problem by opening this opportunity to all classes of people by banning private school and by moving this all privileged resources open to everyone so that all people gain this access. We tell you how mechanically we're going to change the problem in the status quo, and we don't see and the engagement coming from the opposition side is, first of all, that the education overall will be worse, even worse, because we're giving them thinner resources to all people in the society. I have to deal with that. First of all, we don't see that as a justifiable reason to simply put all those limited resources on the privileged one in the society. We don't think this justification makes sense. But second of all, that worst case scenario will not actually be brought down. The case will not actually happen because we also have fundings coming from the cooperation portrayed by the opposition side, saying with those cooperation with moral responsibility that are willing to help the education to promote their image. So we don't see the harms portrayed by the opposition side later. The harms portrayed by the opposition side will actually happen under our case. Let's deal with the opposition side, talking about when they talk about brainwashing, nationalism, propaganda, and special needs of all people. So first of all, my partner already told you that actually this is nationalism and propaganda problem is not going to deal with on the other side of opposition as well, because you can evidently see in China even private school cannot cater the power of government as well. We don't see that problem is sufficiently solved by the opposition side. Second of all, for those who have special needs, first of all, we don't see that after private school, actually those kids with special needs are actually being benefited under the status quo with private school in the status quo as right now. We don't see the opposition side explaining how private school is exactly going to help those people with special needs within the society right now. We don't see that when those underprivileged children with special needs are actually gaining those privilege. in our state school. We only see that the group that are already privileged in the state school are getting more privileges in the city school right now. When you talk about Malaysian schools and Chinese students, we don't see it as an ideal solution to put them isolated from the others into a school to fulfill their special needs. We think that their special needs can also be fulfilled under the public school system. We think it is not. We think we still have a solution to provide them more resources. We still can make public school education meet their special needs, and we think it's even better because they are no longer isolated within their school, but they are open up to the horizon and meeting a diversity of students. So therefore they will learn more in the public school with the diversity of students compared to in the private school where students are all kinds of students that are alike with that special needs. This is what we're supporting.
Here. For government whip, let's welcome opposition whip to closing the entire debate. Here.
You guys fall asleep.
Because the rich are too rich, that's why we take away their resources, their money, as well as they characterize, better education for their children. We think that stance is fundamentally unjustified because they have never given us proof of why that is a systematic problem. But we also think that it's a valid choice for rich people who want to send their kids to better schools. We think they work hard and possibly even sacrifice family time is for the exact reason of wanting a better future for their children. Under their side, they're taking that away. Two questions we have to ask in debate. Firstly, on which side we have more representation and bargaining power for the poor people. Secondly, on which side we have more resources for everyone in general. The first question, on which side we better improve schools by having a more representative student base. The three topics under this. The first one is when their OG told us that rich people, they don't know the way of life for the poor people. That's why after being forced to integrate into poor schools, they have the incentive to, for example, donate money or think for the poor people. We think that's very unlikely based on 4 reasons. The first reason is that we don't think it's a problem to begin with. We think that private schools already give financial aid, allow poor people with abilities to come into the schools. We think that's sufficient exposure already. But secondly, we argue that rich people also have day-to-day interactions with normal people. For example, buying a cup of coffee from Starbucks. We think that's enough exposure as well. But thirdly, why is it unlikely on their side for rich people to donate to these poor schools even after they're reallocated to these public schools? We think it's unlikely because rich people tend to invest in things like prep courses or after-school programs instead of, for example, donating money and allowing the whole school to have better math programs. We think under their categorization how they're selfish, it's more likely that they're just going to spend more money on hiring a teacher. We think change is unlikely to happen under their side. But fourthly, why even if there are donations, why is it still bad? We think fundamentally rich people and poor people, they want different things. We think when rich people donate things, and for example, they want for fancier stadiums, or for example, to fund their basketball team that they bought their son to wear into. We think it's very unlikely they're going to fund things like food stamps or free lunch, no donations under their side whatsoever. The second point is on the point of how under their side you're going to have long-term changes by integrating rich people into poor schools. We think two replies coming from our side. First one, it's principally unjustified to subjugate these children on the other end of the spectrum in order to suffer in order to pick up for viewpoints. We think that's principally unjustified. But secondly, we argue that there already is organic change happening in the public schools. We think that under our side, the parents are becoming more aware simply because they themselves have been through these systems, and that's why they have the incentive to want to change it. Why is it exclusive under their side? Because under their side, once they have these rich parents coming into these public schools, it necessarily crowds out the poor parents in places like, for example, a parent seat in the board of directors. We argue under their side, rich people will take over decision-making powers in these public schools. Necessarily, poor parents are going to lose their voice. It is under their side that you're going to have less expression and less representation, whichever.
Okay, your partner called public schools a punishment and you called private schools a better future. This is because of chronic absenteeism of teachers and stagnant infrastructure. Is that more or less likely to be fixed if a senator's son goes to a public school?
We think that clearly given your problem is that public schools don't have enough resources. Therefore, the most straightforward solution is to increase resources for these public schools. You have to give them a principal justification why, given there is such an easy mechanism, why it necessitates an extreme policy on your side that basically calls for a social redistribution of wealth. Going to the second clash, on which side do we have more resources for everyone in general? On the first thing, they told us that they're going to have less resources for these. They're going to have. We told you that they're going to have less. There's going to be less resources for public schools in general. We think the government budget is limited. There is a pie. If you divide it to more people, then every individual gets less. That's the first layer that Bobby offered you in his speech. But secondly, we told you there's a larger problem because their policy necessarily isolates certain specific individuals with specific needs under their side. Their argument how we can also have public religious schools is simply untrue because public schools, based on its principle of being open to everyone, cannot have selectivity based on something such as identity or religion. We think it's very unlikely to happen under our side. Under our side, we don't have private schools. We're going to have private schools to help these people with special needs for 4 reasons Bobby told you. Firstly, they have more money, but secondly, they often cater towards a niche market. Thirdly, they have a reputation to maintain, i.e., for example, religious schools, they're famous for having faithful Christians coming out from their schools. Or special needs schools, they're famous for having comprehensive care for these children, more likely under our side. But fourthly, we think it's principally unjustified for public schools under their side to have these benefits. That's why they cannot pull off this benefit into their model. So proud to oppose.
All right, thank
Debate?
Yes.
Are you sure? You understand the debate? Do you know what's going on at all? Please say yes.
Yes.
Alright, so thank you for the amazing debaters here that give you a demo debate and give you a demonstration on how exactly a debate should go. But I think a lot of the people realize right here that the speeches in this debate only stands at 5 minutes. Originally, it was supposed to be 7. So that we can see that the debate is condensed, it shortens in order to easier to show you how this is look like, right? So I'm going to give you a general comments on how does it look, why does it look like this, how are the things going on in the debate. So first of all, you can see that there are 4 teams, obviously, that pair up in 2, and then they're giving you the context of supporting and opposing the debate. We can see OG here with Padma and Carolyn here. They have clearly stated that what is the status quo, which is the current problem right now, that the society is facing, who are the people that is suffering, and trying to offer you a policy or a model to solve the problem. So this is how you're going to set up the debate from the very beginning of the debate, right? So they also did a very good job in clearing the pictures and giving you some ideas and arguments. Do I need to? Can you hear me? Am I clear enough? Okay, yes. So give you a solution towards the problem and how exactly this is going to be solved, right? So this is what you would want to do in OG. And these amazing debaters will tell you exactly in detail how you're going to do it and advance it, right? So OO, coming from the opening opposition here, is Victor and Eva. They have give you a clear demonstration on how you are going to respond to arguments, how are you going to give out refutations, which are rebuttals towards the arguments. And Victor here also give you a lot of demonstration on how to give POIs, right? So these are the things that you need to keep in mind that are very important in debates, okay? Moreover, they have also given you what we call as a counter policy or a counter model, where they believe that this model doesn't work, they're going to give you another model so then to solve the problem, right? This is how you run or how you would want to say in this position of OO, but there are also other ways that the debaters here were going to teach you later on. So coming to CG, CG, we see that there are a lot of
responses and engagements towards the upper house of the debate. Moreover, you can see how it cleared the pictures. Oh, hold on. This is Sam and Vanilla. There, yes. So they give you an analysis on what are the main problems, what are the solutions, and how is it in comparison better than the other side. So these are the things that you wanted to do in the closing house, right? They also identify what is the biggest issue of the root problems of the whole debate, correct? So then we move on to the closing opposition, which are here. The amazing Boby and Brandon there, yes. So then, these amazing debaters also demonstrate how they're going to list out the arguments which are more like comparative arguments with a lot of real-life examples and informations from what is really going on in the world that give you a clear or a clearer picture of how it is going to apply in practically in the real world. And moreover, they have give you flashes which are the points where they engage and directly into how the comparison of this debate should work. And these are the things that you would want to do in a summarize where the closing is happening. So this is generally how the debate should go, and they have give you a perfect example on how these things work. So if there's any questions and you think that, oh, I have some question about the demo debate, I wanted to know more about how we're going to debate in certain issues or how are we going to be better in certain position, please feel free to come forward to us, any of us here, and even talk around with people and what do you have in mind or what are the ideas that you thought would be helpful in the cases or what are the things that, it's not quite good, but then, yeah, these are very amazing debaters, so then we add more points. But yeah, feel free to discuss because this is how we want to learn more about debate. Do not just sit and, write notes. That is not going to help you go anywhere. Talk to each other, know more about how other people think about the debate and the perspective of how people see the debates. This is how you are going to improve. Cheers.